Hey guys, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. My name is Crown, and today I'm going to read you some very interesting stories that I hope that you're gonna love. And now, without further ado, let's go! So, many years ago, while still a teen, I moved out of my parents' place to live across the street from my junior college. There were many students in the building, so I rented a room in a large basement 3-bedroom unit that was reserved for students at the school. I didn't really know anyone in the building as it was on the other side of the city from where I grew up. At the time, there was one other roommate already living in a unit who we will call Sean. To be kind, Sean was a short, big guy. Older than myself by a few years, he was in some kind of simplified remedial program as he'd failed a couple of school years, and mentioned how this was his last chance to make something of himself in his parents' eyes. Kinda dim, not too much going on in his life, but harmless. Or so I thought. Anyways, I was hoping to start things off on the right foot with him, as he was to be my roommate, so I wanted to be friends. As I was moving in my stuff, he mentioned how he had no money for a moving van, so I offered to do a trip with my rented van to his parents if he needed any help moving some stuff of his. He happily accepted. So we drive to his parents, where I met his mother and discover that he's from a somewhat affluent family. Somewhat surprising considering he's too broke to hire a van. But whatever. Couple days later I met his nice girlfriend who lived up the hill from our apartment. Translation, she was extremely affluent. This girlfriend would dote on him, visiting him a lot at our place, to the point where she would regularly hand-deliver him delicious meals that had been prepared at her house. This will be important later. Anyways, it slowly becomes apparent that this unassuming guy has a dishonest streak. While moving my stuff in, I'd mentioned that I'd had a spare waterbed. He immediately offered to buy it. So I moved it in myself and set it up with the agreement he'd pay me a friend price, around $200 for a 700 bed. Weeks pass and he keeps giving me excuses about not paying whenever the subject comes up. He then started to randomly shift the narrative to a story about how his wealthy parents can pay for us to get a great condo in a new development just up the street. I remember wondering why his parents would make such an offer despite the fact that we've been moved into our current apartment. The story didn't make sense. Nevertheless, he constantly tried to set up some visits with me and get me involved. I wasn't really interested in moving again at this point, so I never really pursued it. I learned later that this was not only a lie, but a typical plot of his. Anyways, as I had just moved out of my old neighborhood, I hadn't opened a new bank account in this new part of town. This was before internet banking, so I was keeping my money, a couple hundred, hidden in my room until I set up an account nearby. I was only loosely keeping track of this money, and barely noticed how my money was going a little quickly until one day I went to get my last $40 and it was gone. Unfortunately, by this point the third roommate had moved into our flat, a cool hippie dude from the Maritimes. So although I was convinced it was Sean that had robbed me, I wasn't 100% sure. To resolve things as amicably as possible, I decided to give him a chance to come clean. So one night I asked him point blank, fairly casual, if he'd taken my money, as I'd noticed a small amount was missing. I'll never forget his reaction. He immediately stiffened. His eyes glazed over and he blurted out, "I didn't take anything, it wasn't me," and just stared at me. I was shocked. He didn't just look guilty, his reaction had such a rehearsed quality. I could tell he'd been accused of similar things many times before. I tried my best to be calm, smile and act as if I believed him, but inside I was livid. I couldn't stop thinking about how this guy was trying to play me like a fool. I realized that although I knew it was him, I couldn't do anything about it as I had no proof. By this point, I felt sick to be living in the same space as this guy. I realized to get out of this situation and to deal with this jerks appropriately, I would have to lay a trap. To make sure he didn't suspect anything, the next day I was all smiles. Playing dumb, I exclaimed loudly how I hope I don't lose my money again. I just got paid, and left the apartment. Before I left, I made sure to leave my video camera filming my room. This was so long ago. It was a huge VS tape camera that I had to hide on my bed under pillows, but it still worked like a charm. I came back, replayed the tape, and 60 minutes in, I saw that jerk going through my stuff. I tell you, I went cold as I seen Sean casually rifle through my things. My suspicions confirmed. I had to cool off with my friends across town over some beers. When I finally told them all what was happening, they started pulling out bats, hockey sticks, and suggesting we go pay Sean a visit. As tempting as this was now in college and didn't want to resort to messy violence. So instead, I plotted my revenge. The first thing I did was to make sure my cool, hippie third roommate was in the loop. Not having had a lot of time to get to know him, I asked him his thoughts on retribution, and if he agreed with an eye for an eye. Confident we were on the same page, I showed him the video. He freaks out over having a thief for a roommate, but I reassure him to just be cool, cause some things are going to happen to Sean real soon. Then, I went to stay at my parents' house and waited until that Thursday. You see, Sean liked to talk a lot. Turns out his rich parents had actually kicked him out of the house. The fact he'd actually found an apartment and gone back to school was a big success for him. On Thursday, he'd be out of the apartment as his parents were having a big congratulatory dinner for him at their place. So I waited until I knew the dinner was underway, then called his house to speak to his mother. Crazy thing is, both he and his sister pick up the phone at the same time. So while his sister goes to get his mom on the line, he's asking me loudly, "Why are you calling my mother?" repeatedly. His mother gets on, and while Sean's screaming at his mother to hang up, I calmly state, "I'm sorry to disturb you, but I have reason to believe your son has stolen from me." Suddenly, there is dead silence. After almost a minute, she replies, "Take it up with Sean," and just hangs up. What the hell? I don't know what reaction I expected, but it wasn't that. Anyways, now with just Sean on the line, I tell him the jig is up. I have him on tape and I want my money back. His replies, "You have nothing on me. Screw you." At this point, I realize he's right. I'd really only filmed him rifling through my stuff. If I went to the police, the charges wouldn't stick and there was a good chance he knew it. So by this point, I tried very hard to be reasonable about things, but as it was, his rich parents couldn't care less. I had no real proof to go to the police with, and worst of all, I still had a year-long lease to live with him. So screw that. I told him he better find another place to live and hung up the phone as it was time to go crazy on him. Remember how I said he talked too much? Turns out he bragged about how he faked his credentials for the apartment and landlord had never checked. So the first step was to drive with my folks to the landlord's office and tell him to evict him for theft immediately. When they started telling me crap like, "We will have to take some time to review this matter," I immediately threatened a lawsuit over how they are liable as I can prove they never did the prescribed background check. My landlord goes pale and instantly promises everything I ask. I then take this moment to go downstairs for a minute, a statement witnessed by multiple people. I then go to Sean's room and take thousands of dollars of his expensive stuff, stereo, TV, hockey jerseys, cologne, and so on, and put it all outside on our enclosed/hidden fire escape. I then go straight back up upstairs, hello alibi, and leave with my folks. First chance I get, I call my friends with the bats. "Hey guys, who wants a new wardrobe and entertainment system?" I give them the instruction on how to find all of Sean's stuff hidden in the unused back alley and chill with parents for the next 3 to 4 days. Upon my return to the apartment, I'm greeted with awe by a highly entertained, happy roommate who gave me the play-by-play of what went down in my absence. Apparently, Sean returned from his dinner to an empty room devoid of any of his possessions, causing him to rampage through the apartment and curse my name. When the hippie innocently asked what's wrong Sean, he tells him that I stole all his stuff. but his dad would get it back for him. As if. The next morning, his alarm clock was the landlord walking into his room and showing it to a potential tenant while informing him that he was evicted immediately. He would later be dumped by his rich girlfriend who was buying his groceries. He hadn't changed. Sean again was lying and cheating, and disowned very publicly by his well-to-do dad. Indeed, his dad came to the apartment, but only to tell Sean that he was worthless and that despite his crying and begging, he couldn't live back at the house. Desperate, Sean followed his dad outside and jumped on the hood of the car, pleading to go home. Their dad had to drive to a nearby police station to have him removed. Last thing I heard, he was broke, dropped out of school, dumped by his girlfriend, and camping in a friend's backyard in a tent in Canada in November. I had always been an active and adventurous person, but 6 years ago my life changed forever when I was involved in a car accident that left me paralyzed from the waist down. It was a difficult adjustment, and the loss of my mobility was hard to accept at first, but I was determined not to let my disability hold me back, and I worked hard to become as independent as possible. I used a wheelchair to get around and had a strong support system of family and friends who helped me with the tasks that were more challenging for me. One of those friends and support systems was my younger brother, who had always been very protective of me since my accident. I think it's because I was always very protective and kind to him when we were young, and he has always looked up to me. He never hesitated to lend me a helping hand or offer his support whenever I needed it, and I was grateful to have him by my side. On this particular day, my brother and his young family had invited me to join them at the aquarium. It was a hot summer day and the small aquarium was packed with families and tourists trying to escape the heat. The crowds were chaotic and it was difficult for me, being in a wheelchair, to see some of the exhibits due to my height. As I was trying to get a better view, a mother, let's call her Karen, and her 2 children pushed their way through the group. Karen and her children were pushing their way through the crowds, ignoring the polite requests of others to wait their turn and not block the walkways. They seemed to think that they were entitled to do whatever they wanted, without regard for the safety and convenience of others. They were making it difficult for everyone, especially for those who had mobility issues or were using strollers. Karen's children were also running around wildly, bumping into people and knocking over exhibits. They were loud and disruptive, and seemed to have no regard for the rules of the aquarium or the enjoyment of others. Karen did nothing to control them or teach them to behave. Instead, seemed to be encouraging their bad behavior. As we were trying to get a better view of one of the exhibits, Karen and her children pushed their way through the group and tried to get in front of us. I asked her politely to give me some space and not block my view, but she became very angry and started to argue with me. She told me that I was being rude and that she had the right to see the exhibits too. And the argument quickly escalated. Then before long, a staff member had to intervene and ask Karen to calm down and respect the needs of the disabled individuals. He tells her, "Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to calm down and respect the needs of the disabled individuals in this group." "What are you talking about? I have the right to see the exhibits too." "Yes, of course you do, but you also have the responsibility to be considerate of others and not block their views or disrupt their enjoyment of the aquarium. Your children are also running around wildly and knocking over exhibits, which is not acceptable behavior." "Well, they are just kids. You can't expect them to sit still and be quiet all the time." "No, but you can expect them to respect the rules of the aquarium and the enjoyment of others. And you, as their parent, have a responsibility to teach them to do so. If you can't control your children and follow the rules, I'm afraid I'm going to have to ask you to leave." "You can't kick me out. I'm a paying customer." "Ma'am, I understand that you are upset, but your behavior is not acceptable. If you can't calm down and follow the rules, I'm going to have to ask you to leave." "I'm not going anywhere. I want to speak to the manager. This lazy guy," she points at me, "doesn't deserve all the attention he's getting." Karen then began to throw a tantrum, getting loud and calling for the manager. When the manager arrived, she started yelling about how next time she visited the aquarium, She's going to find herself a wheelchair to sit in so that she will be treated like a little princess. She continued to argue and make demands, causing a scene and causing more chaos in the already crowded and chaotic aquarium. The manager, trying to de-escalate the situation, tried to reason with Karen and explain the importance of respecting the other visitors too, especially the disabled ones. But Karen was too blinded by her entitlement and refused to listen or apologize for her behavior. Eventually, the manager had no choice but to call the security guards to remove Karen from the premises. As she was being escorted out, Karen continued to scream and cause a disturbance, causing even more embarrassment and shame for herself and her children. As Karen continued to throw a tantrum and cause a scene, my 4-year-old nephew became upset and frightened by her loud and aggressive behavior. He had always been very protective of me as well, and he could sense that Karen was causing me stress and discomfort. And without hesitation, he marched up to Karen and yelled at her to stop screaming at me. "Leave my uncle alone!" he shouted. "You're a bad person!" Everyone in the aquarium around us was stunned by his boldness and bravery, and a hush fell over the crowd as they watched the confrontation unfold. Karen, taken aback by my nephew's defiance, got really angry and eventually snapped out of it and charged at him, ready to teach him a lesson as she shouted. But my brother, who had been watching the scene with concern, quickly stepped in and grabbed the Karen by the arm, stopping her in her tracks. "Yeah, over my dead body, witch," he shouted at her as he clocked her down to the floor. And yeah, we could all argue that he probably shouldn't have done that, especially in front of his kid, but I personally think you can't really judge a man for protecting his 4-year-old boy and his disabled brother from being attacked by a full grown-up woman. It's completely justified in my opinion. Anyways, when the police arrived, they arrested Karen and charged her with assault and disturbing the peace. And as they left, my little soldier watched them go with a fierce look of protection and love in his eyes. I really love him. But sadly, it doesn't end here. It had been a year since the incident at the aquarium, and it seems that everything went back to how it was before this whole incident took place. Nephew was starting kindergarten, going outside and making new friends, while Karen was supposedly serving time for the charges that were pressed against her that day. That's what I thought was happening until I heard recently from my brother that Karen had attempted to take my nephew from his kindergarten. She tried to convince his teacher that she was his aunt and was picking him up today on behalf of his mother, but my nephew, who had always been wise beyond his years, saw through Karen's deception and refused to go with her. He shouted for help and hid behind his teacher, who immediately called the police. Karen, realizing that her plan had failed, panicked and tried to flee, but she was quickly apprehended by the police and arrested for kidnapping and impersonation. As she was led away in handcuffs, Karen kept screaming about how my nephew was a reason for all of this and how she blamed him for her losing custody of her children in the custody battle she had with her father, and that the least she could do is to take him away from his parents, just like they took her kids away from her. Hearing that was both terrifying and sad at the same time. And yeah, this time Karen was locked behind bars for a very long time for attempting to kidnap my favorite little man. Strange how something so silly as the encounter we had at the aquarium could be the reason for locking someone up behind bars for a huge part of his life. You know what? If she needs help, I really hope she gets it somehow. And now we have reached the end of today's stories. Thank you for watching and see you next time.